Cool. Well, I mean, I think let's dive straight into it. I am thinking that there's kind of two ways we could skin this cat, right? We are, praise it, thank you for the follow, kind of talking about improvement through the lens of this
Mhm.
challenge I'm doing, which is taking 30 days to try to get to the point where I can do 30 cubes multi-blind. So I
Right.
feel like I could start off telling you how I've thought about the kind of improvement and how I've set up my plan for it, or I could just
Mhm.
throw the problem statement of the challenge at you, and I would almost be curious to see how you would riff on it, and then we can bring in what I'm actually doing. How would you prefer to kind of come at it?
Uh, let's take a look at what you had first, and I'm very curious to see what plan you came up with to get to that level.
So,
Um, yeah.
okay, cool. Um, Sorry, I'm just gonna speak to fill dead air for a second while I just I've been doing a bit of false advertising on my side. I had myself
Mhm.
labeled as you, which is great for my
Oh,
ego, but is not true, unfortunately. Okay, cool. All right, we're good to go. Okay, so I've been doing blind for almost a year and a half, which is scary to say.
Mhm.
I before 30, so I'm in the middle of 30 days to 30 cubes V2. V1 was me going, well, I'm at about 20 cubes. I hate the process of memorization. I would like to switch to a person action object memorization system. That should take a week or two. Person action
oh
object,
boy,
I don't,
oh boy.
yeah, I know. That's when the narrator comes in and goes, little did RG know, you know? So for those listening without context, person action object, instead of having one image for each letter pair in blind, I have three, and I choose between the three images I have for a letter pair based on whether it's first, second, or third in the order. So instead of having three random images, I would have a person doing an action to an object, which is very nice to memorize in theory, but I massively underestimated how hard it would be to learn. I massively underestimated the importance of familiarity with your letter pairs as well. So my first more than a month was just getting comfortable with person action object. So I would say that now coming into V2, I'm at the point where I feel I can actually try to improve. So I'm at the point where I can do pre-PAO, I could do 20, maybe 22 cubes sub hour. I'm now at the point where I can do 16 to 20 based on, you know, what the weather's like and what I had to eat that day.
Mhm.
I know full freestyle, my com list isn't optimal, but I can average under 30 seconds, like 25 to 30 seconds freestyle execution.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of the context I'm coming in with. And when I ask
Mhm.
a question like, I want to solve 30 cubes in under an hour, how do I do it? The first thing I look to do is really break the event down into its constituent parts, right? Instead of just kind of grinding out attempts, I'm looking to go, well, what do I need to be fast at in order to do this? And what am I slow at currently? So practically speaking, what that means is I go, well, 30 cubes in an hour means that I need to memorize 30 cubes in 40 minutes. 30 cubes in 40 minutes is 80 seconds memorization per cube, leaving me 40 seconds per cube execution time, right? And then I
Mhm.
break those steps down into their constituent parts. And I go, execution is easy. I need to recall a letter pair. I need to associate that letter pair with a commutator, like a com recognition time, and then I need to execute the damn thing, right? And that's really it. And just based on pure logic, I look at that number and I go, well, with perfect think ahead, I could easily average under 30 seconds, right? So looking at execution here, obviously I want to do ongoing com practice, but execution doesn't feel like where I'm losing time because with perfect think
Mhm.
ahead, I can already achieve that. If I look at
Right.
memorization, sorry, is it cool if I'm just info dumping? Should I just keep going
No,
with the
go
fire
ahead.
hose?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
cool.
Yeah.
So then if I look at memorization time, this is where things get interesting, right? I reviewed some of Graham Siggins. I looked at what he was doing and realized that instead of memorizing the cube once really well and then reviewing it, he's doing two quick passes of the cube. Where the first is a quick review, and then the second will almost be where things actually stick. So then I can think about memorization as we could talk about it as first pass, second pass, review, further reviews. Um,
Mhm.
but I feel like there are further steps beyond that. If we just look at the first pass, there is the tracing of the cube where I identify letter pairs on the cube. There is
Mhm.
letter pair association where I go, okay, I've got the letter pair A, B. What letter pair does that correspond to? And then there's a substep
Mhm.
in there of PAO association. Then there's encoding, which is the process by which I take three images, three letter pairs, and make them into a memorable image. And then memorization, where I take that image and put it into my memory palace. And the sum of all of those steps needs to be, if I look at what gram splits look like, that all needs to happen in 25 seconds for a first pass in order for me to, for everything to kind of scale up to 80 seconds memorization. I kind of start with step one and go, does the time I take on this step make it possible for me to hit sub 80? And at the moment, it takes me about 25 seconds just to trace the cube and associate data pairs. And so I'm thinking, well, that's not even including encoding time, right? So I need to get that down to at least 15 seconds so that I have 10 seconds to encode. And then memorization is just, once you have a memorable image, I think it happens very quickly. I think it's negligible. So I'm seeing that as really the big thing. Tracing time and encoding time are the things I'm really focusing on. Practically speaking, what that means for me in terms of my practice is I'm really focusing on three things at the moment. One is pure tracing practice, where I'll just trace the cube to the point where I have letter pairs, not try to make anything memorable out of it, just go through the cube as fast as I can and do that to improve my tracing speed. Thing two, which I alternate with that so that my brain doesn't burn out, is just com review. Like there's just some comms that I'm not super familiar with or that my finger tricks are bad for or whatever. And so then I'll just do some com review, which is much less mentally intense. And then the third thing is grinding out multi-attempts. One thing I think that I've underestimated is the importance of being familiar with a letter pair list and switching from a 500 letter pair list where I was familiar with all of it because I've been using it for a year to a 1500 letter pair list where I was familiar with maybe 200 of those images because they carried over. Realized that I needed to do a lot more slower attempts where I really focused on visualizing and becoming familiar with letter pairs. So that's what, sorry, this has been a whole, it's like a long time, but that's where I'm approaching the challenge from at the moment. I've done a lot of slower multi-attempts. I'm starting to feel like that's translating into faster memorization. And so it's really multi-attempts, tracing, com review. That are the big three things I'm working on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the biggest thought that I've had for all of this is I really like how you've broken down every step of the process pretty much as far as you need to isolate individual skills. And yeah, with person action object, one thing that I'd like to ask you is, with the big attempts you've done with this so far, have you experienced a significant increase in your recall from when you didn't use PO? Because what some people who have tried it have experienced, not me personally, I actually am a bigger proponent of PAO than like most high-level blinders. What a lot of people will say, including like I think Mascow was one of the people who pointed this out, is that creating a repetitive structure within your memo for a long period of time will make it more forgettable as it converges to as the limit approaches infinity. You're making it more forgettable by creating fewer different types of structures where everything has to be person action object. I disagree with that. And I think pretty strongly so.
Interesting.
But
yeah,
that's just I was just curious to hear how it's been going, just to kind of get an idea of like, you know, because I guess it is more nuanced than that. My probably like really real thoughts on that are just like, it depends on the person, and for some people it very well may just be worse than just having a single letter pair list.
Yeah.
Or whatnot. It's also worth mentioning that he didn't actually use letter pairs when he did blind.
Really?
He did direct algorithm to image association. Like no letters as an in-between step. It's just
wild.
each algorithm is directly to an image. And I think that may have turned PAO into a detriment for him, because he didn't have that framework. And all of us who have, just kind of used letter pairs our entire blind careers kind of underestimate how much of a framework that is, and like how much that actually helps with creating letter pairs. Because if the barrier to entry were just memorize 500 different things and what pieces they cycle on the cube, that wouldn't really work very well for many people. And we have letters to just aid that process greatly. And that is essentially, it is like letters are almost just a mnemonic device in themselves, essentially.
Wow, that's really interesting, because it almost feels like you're learning about a different, if you've only ever spoken English your entire life, it feels like learning that a different language exists almost. To think about somebody memorizing the cube without letter pairs, or without some sort of, rather, without some sort of abstraction system. You could do it with numbers or even symbols or whatever. Letters seem to be the most efficient, but that's really interesting.
Also, Braden's bringing up a good point that Moscow just was a Memory League competitor before he did cubing, so he also had experience from that. And I think the way memory memory athletes use PAO is actually somewhat different from how cubers will use it. And that also plays into it. I think it's I think it's a lot more uniform for memory competitors because the amount of information they're encoding is so static, whereas on a cube, edges might be 6 algs or 7 algs or 5 algs, and I think that is enough of a difference to make it worth it in cubing, honestly.
Interesting.
Sorry if I'm kind of going on too much of a tangent with this. That overall, I just find it interesting that you're committing to PAO for this because it's something that not many people have done. It's a really uncommon trait to see in a high level blinder, and I'm really interested to see where this goes actually. But anyway, on to going back to the main point. With your memo, you broke it down into multiple different steps. But one thing that I wonder is what exactly is your review process? After how many cubes do you do your first review?
First pass 1 to 4, second pass 1 to 4, and then review.
Okay.
And then I would, thereafter, if I was doing a larger attempt, I would review a full 8-pack. I've never actually tried 1 to 8, but I feel like it might be a little out of my league at the moment.
At a high level, one thing that kind of differs from what you described is that the encoding process kind of occurs as you go. It's very intermittent. It's not really a separate step as much, I feel. And it makes me wonder if, especially because you're doing 1 to 4 and you're not at the 1 to 8 step yet, if practicing something like a 9 cube attempt where you attempt to like encode on the second pass, essentially, is something that would help you. It's not something that I can guarantee will work, but it's something that I do quite a bit. If it's trivial to encode, I'll encode it on the first pass, but if it's not, I'll kind of just let it sit as words, and then on the second pass, I'll just kind of think about it a little bit more as I review the cube. Because when you're going fast enough, essentially, your 1 to 8 happens within a span of like 3 minutes, and you're already back to the first cube. And that's short enough time to where even if you don't have it encoded, you can kind of just remember the words, and you don't even have to trace the cube again. And I wonder if you're at the point where you can kind of do that with 1 to 4 almost. This is all kind of like experimental things that I'm just thinking about. I haven't done too much multi-blind very recently, but these are just like thoughts I've been having about where do you get time save when you're already encoding so much information.
You said that that they're there just as words and you can remember them, something along those lines. Are you saying that you would first pass 1 to 8 and come back to 1, and you would still would you be able to, not looking at the cube, remember the words that you had on 1, but they're just kind of short-term memory?
Essentially, yes.
Wow. Okay.
One thing that I should mention though is that a lot of the times it'll kind of sit in my memory palace like partially encoded, and I'll kind of be able to just visualize like I can visualize like this first letter pair, and it's just like, oh yeah, there's only one story that goes with this letter pair. I know what that person does in this story, and that's essentially how it works a lot of the time. Another thing that I'll mention, just kind of stepping like back one level again, is that these 4 steps, even if you're doing them all on the first pass, I don't know if I can even consider them like that separate, because a lot of the time what I'll do is I'll take the first letter pair, I'll visualize what it is and place it in the memory palace. Second letter pair do the same, third letter pair do the same, and since you're using PAO at that point, you can kind of put them together as one like PAO block, and then it's already in your memory palace, and there's no need for a second step to kind of, immerse it in the space and, let them interact because they're already doing that.
So, I mean, if you cast your mind back a while to when you weren't good at multi-blind, like a question I have is that a function of just how fast and familiar you've gotten with the different steps? Like, because for you, tracing is, it's like reading a book at this point, I'd imagine. Like identifying letter pairs or identifying letters, associating them to your letter pair list, figuring out cycle breaks. My assumption is that would be stuff that you're very familiar with. So I suppose my question is, would you say that those are distinct steps that you can recognize, but you've gotten so comfortable with them that they start to blur just because you can do each of them so quickly?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you were like when you're at the 1520 cube level, would you have seen those being more distinct? Or
that's a good question. I honestly don't think so because when I was at that level, I think I kind of saw the challenge of multi-blind as just big blind but a step up. And as a result, I kind of did some very, very three blindy things. And I think part of that involved, combining these steps and doing my initial memo and encoding kind of all at once.
Interesting. Okay. What three blind level were you at when you started to get into multi?
It's hard to say when I got into it because I did my first just random 2-cube attempt when I averaged about 2 minutes. But I started to actually pick it up when I was probably about 130 on three blind.
Interesting. Okay. Which is still like quite slow, relatively speaking. Or at that stage, I would expect those things to feel more distinct. It doesn't support my thesis that they're more distinct when you're slower. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think if anything, when I was slower, what would happen is I would separate these steps, but kind of do it. It's more of like trace one letter pair, encode one letter pair, trace the next pair, encode the next pair, rather than trace all and code all. And it's hard to say which would even be, more beneficial.
Yes. No, I do think that 4-step process is per letter pair, at least initially.
Right.
I have started thinking about whether that could be buffered. Can you trace, especially for PAO, can you trace 3 letter pairs and then do the association and then encode them, and would that be faster? But because PAO tracing is also more mentally intense, I don't even have the spare mental bandwidth at the moment to hold anything in my short-term memory besides like what the current pair is.
Right.
You were curious about PAO? Should we touch on that?
Yeah, if you have more to say about it, that's something that I'm really interested in discussing.
The reason I got into PAO in the first place was because I was really frustrated by the encoding process in normal multi-blind with just a normal letter pair list. And I almost think that it's a reflection of the fact that my brain is very linear and I lack creativity. So if I got the classic thing for me would be if I got like object person or person. Those are
those are the worst.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things that I would find impossible to memorize. If I have Sig, Stanley, RG, like putting those in a way where I can memorably discern, was it Sig, Stanley, then RG, or was it RG, then Stanley, then Sig? Like that would just go to pieces in my mind, to the point that I didn't enjoy multi-blind, I think, or I found it a very frustrating experience. And so
I see.
The main reason I checked out PAO was a quality of life increase for myself, I think. From that perspective, I think it's worked amazingly. I enjoy the encoding process a lot more now. And I also think that because my brain is probably quite linear, I enjoy the structured nature of PAO memo more than others might. I would also say, having spoken to people, I felt like there wasn't a huge amount of basis for the amount of skepticism around PAO. And I say that knowing that I'm kind of a nobody in the multi community, but
Yeah.
It's, the encoding problem I was talking about, somebody like Sig doesn't experience anymore because he's
Right.
so intimately familiar with this current data pair list and so well practiced. I think Tom Nelson had tried it. I think Enoch Gray had tried it, but it takes a phenomenal amount of work. I mean, building a letter pair list took me like 2 to 3 months, and then you finish it and your list sucks,
Yeah.
And
One
then,
thing that I'll actually mention is
yeah.
that I'm building a PAO list right now for four blind. I've tried it on and off for actually like a couple years, but
Mm,
there's just always been like something that gets too far in the way. Previously, it was having competitions, and now it's just like I just got demotivated for months and just kind
mm,
of like quit cubing for a while.
interesting.
But I'm starting that up again. I've always, like I mentioned, been like a backseat proponent of it, and I've been called a dumbass for doing so. Um,
I don't think that's a
but
reflection of
yeah,
your intelligence. Yeah, I also just feel that my base logic was like, people do it in the memory community and it works, in the memory sports
yeah,
community, and it works.
mhm,
And the main issue people seem to bring up is that you don't have exactly like you said, you don't have a completely static amount of information. Um,
mhm.
you're not always memorizing things in 3 pair blocks, but I just honestly haven't found that to be a huge issue so far. But
I mean, I think that helps if anything, because
yeah, it makes it less
if you
monotonous.
yeah, if you have just like a person doing an action and that's open ended, then that's just more variety of memory atoms, I guess,
Mm,
and you kind of have many more things to build, and it's so helpful.
mm.
I think it just makes the process easier to have that trait.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would agree. And then from personal experience, I can't overstate how difficult it's been and how frustrating it's been to learn.
Mm,
That if anybody, honestly, at this point, if anybody asked me, should I learn PAO, I would be like, be really freaking sure you want to. Because I still don't even know if it's good. I'm about as good as I was without PAO. And if I'd
mm,
taken 2 months and just practiced a normal letter pair list, I would certainly be better than I am now. So it still feels like an experiment, but my quality of life has increased. The other thing that I would say is I very rarely forget things. I wouldn't say I had a massive issue forgetting things before, but it's to the point that if I struggle to remember something, it's a real surprise. And order DNFs because of memo order are a non-thing. It just doesn't happen.
mm.
Like
I see.
it's impossible, which is really nice.
Hmm.
The one issue I have had, I mean, there's a bunch of ways to implement it. I've had what I'd call reverse recognition issues where I know, okay, and it's partially a function of my not being familiar enough with my list, and partially a function that there's action crossover.
Hmm.
Because, you make 500 what you think are distinct actions, then you wrote sleeping twice, but you missed an E in it once, and so there's a duplicate. So, like, and I need to do a whole bunch of deduping. But so if, I'll get to, okay, I know this person was sleeping, I remember the action, but who the hell in my letter pair list sleeps?
Hmm.
That's actually an important point. My actions and objects don't relate back to the letter pair. They relate back to an anchor person, which is an easier way to generate a letter pair list, but it's not what people think about PO.
Yeah. How's your process of dealing with, for example, actions and objects that are in, you know, like in too much self-agreement, like sleeping on a bed. Like that's
Oh, easy.
how do you remember the object? It's the sort of thing where I think that's something that's like a big challenge with
Interesting.
it for me, where it just makes me think, what what was he sleeping on?
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it like honestly it makes it harder for me. It's interesting to hear that you just find that really easy, because it's yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I would honestly say it's a non thing.
I see.
It's not an issue. I mean, I've done 1 to 200 cubes worth of memo with it at this point. Yeah, that's not something I've run into. I would say the reverse recognition is by far
Hmm.
my Achilles heel at the moment.
Right. I see.
It's
Yeah.
very interesting
No.
that you're
Yeah.
looking into it for big blind purposes, though. I,
Hmm.
I'm very curious to hear how you find it if you do manage to.
Hmm. I'll probably implement it for multi if it goes successfully, but I thought I'd use for blind for the test drive because I think that's where I can see the biggest benefit. I actually lose a decent amount of time from encoding and memo, and I think this could be the thing that opens up the door to, you know, like 18 memo average. We'll see. You know?
Yeah. But yeah, that's dope. And I suppose that's also you're kind of pushing the accelerator to hit 18 memo a bit, I guess.
Yeah, because I can almost just not encode when doing PAO for big blind because I'm only I only need to access it, you know, 20 seconds later. If we're talking about rings, and
freaking dope. Yeah, it's like less time than if you're doing a one pass on your first pass on an 8-pack or something. It's actually really quick.
Right.
I would say that probably the other most consistent issue I've had is my people feeling very generic. Like a very common one is I'll somehow like abstract the person I have, so creature, whatever, entity. Either real life people will just feel very interchangeable, and I'm like, oh, it was somebody who's kind of tall and sassy doing this, and there's 4 or 5 people that could be, you know. Or the big one for me is small cute thing. I have like Oddish, I have Ewok, I have Pug, I have Puppy, and I'm like, it was a small cute thing doing this, but which small cute thing? Which is, I think, partially an encoding issue and partially a reflection that the letter pair list needs work.
Right.
Yeah, but I do find that infrequently do I forget the action and object. Often if I'm forgetting something, I'll forget the person at the start.
Yeah, no, that's definitely another issue I've run into, and I think the solution, the best solution that I found for myself is to just, you know, inject way too many Pokemon into my person list.
Yes.
It works.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. What gen did you play? Can tangent us for a second.
I started on Gen 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Gen 7, Gen 8 stuff, but I imagine like at that point it's, I don't know, I feel like I have enough to work with.
You've got a couple hundred, you know.
With 718, yeah.
Yeah.
721, yeah.
No, I agree. Pokemon have been amazing, and I believe that Sig built his Mega Blind letter pair list, which was like 3,300, and he was using a lot of Pokemon moves as actions as well, which is really interesting.
I do that as well.
So I watched Jake Claassen do a seminar on 3Blind basically and spoke about the importance of having short letter pairs. And I think I had a pretty good letter pair list in terms of just how long it takes to think about something when I was doing my previous letter pair list. To do person action object, I've had to axe that. I mean, I'm not doing, you know, ventriloquist or fire department or anything really long, but certainly we're talking like 2 to 3 syllables is much more common than it would have been before. What's your opinion on that being an issue?
I think it's almost a non-issue for Multiblind, honestly. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot because in a shorter event it's going to matter a great deal. But a lot of times my approach to it is choose the image blind to its name so I can just choose the best image and not worry about how many syllables its name has. But if it is a lot, then I'll just, you know, come up with a shortening of its name and just that's its new name.
Yes. I've found that works really surprisingly well. Shedinja, I just call Shage, and it works. Yeah. There's something called the Near Vosh in an anime I used to watch, and I just call it Vosh, and it works really surprisingly well. So is that the kind of thing you've thought about using, or have you actually implemented that short?
I implemented it pre-PAO as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it's something I've done. It's something I've done for a while. Ishan actually got to a point where he had made up so many words for 3Blind that he would like accidentally use them in conversations.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's so great. Yeah, I have one made up letter pair that I'm very proud of. Besides that, like I said, my thinking's pretty linear. But I do just find it remarkable how we can just make up random crap and create associations for it, and our brains are like, great, we'll do it.
Yeah.
You know, it just works.
Yeah. It's so crazy how it just works the way it does. It's really, it almost feels like it's too convenient.
Yeah. It's comparable to, I think, the method of loci as well, where you're like, this is cheating. This can't be how my brain works. This is just too easy.
Yeah, and like with the associations thing, I remember, you know, one letter pair that I just came up with and I was very new to blind solving is I couldn't come up with a letter pair for IW. That was, you know, a big struggle for me. So So I was just like, let's think of a random thing. Okay, basketball. Okay, that's my new IW.
Yeah.
And it's still instant association.
Yeah, ship it. I think
Yeah,
that's one of the things I've
it
started
works.
to figure out during the process of this and proselytize to my chat a little bit is that the only reason we have association between our letter pairs and our images is for convenience. Like AG, I use the Pokemon Aggron. I could as well use covered because when you're at the point where you're trying to, I would say even sub 1 3 blind, like you shouldn't be spending a lot of time thinking about, okay, AG, what was my AG letter pair Aggron? That you just see something and it should be instant association, like flashcard association. So that association becomes arbitrary at a point because you're not thinking about it. It's just trained. Would you kind of agree with that statement? I mean, the basketball anecdote seems to speak to it.
Yeah. I think it really is just, there's, the way I see it, there's kind of like 6 different associations you're making. Basically you have alg to letter pair, alg to image, and image to letter pair, and all of their reverses. And you just need to have all of them instant. Alg to letter pair and vice versa we can get by training our comms. That's the easy. Those are the easiest 2 to get. We have image to letter pair and letter pair to image, and that seems like something you have really good ways of practicing, and it's working out really well. But the one that's the most important, the hardest to get, and one that I think a lot of people are the worst at is image to alg directly.
Interesting.
That's so important for doing things at a high level. You need, like, in execution, you can cut down so much time. Like, if you have perfect think ahead, this wouldn't matter. But since people don't have perfect think ahead, directly converting your story into your algs is one of the most powerful things you can possibly do.
So to clarify that, you're saying that you think of basketball and you're executing your WI com.
Basketball is this to me. Yes.
Right. Interesting. Let's do it. Oh, dude, I want to dive on this. I'm really interested in this, like, image to alg association thing you're talking about, because it's the kind of thing that's bounced around in the back of my head, but honestly hasn't become priority yet because I barely have a functioning letter pair list. Question 1, is that the kind of thing you recommend? It sounds like it is. Right, to get that instant association.
Highly so.
Interesting.
It's something that there is a backup for, because if you can get those first 2 steps down where you have your letter pair to image and or your alg to your letter pair and your letter pair to an image, you have kind of a backdoor to get your image to alg association. Right. But like I said, that is only sufficient for really high level solving if you have perfect think ahead, right, which nobody does. So
essentially there are 2 paths one could take. 2 roads diverge in a yellow wood. You can either, if you get an image, associate that back to your letter pair, and then associate that letter pair to a com. And that's all. That path always exists. That's a backup, even if this more efficient path fails. But the more efficient path is just image to com straight up. So
Atkins is an RUF out. Atkins is an RUF corner com. Yep.
Yeah. Damn. Hey, shout out to Atkins. Yep. Talk to me about your process for learning that, because I'm really curious about this. Did you just think about this over time and gradually implement it? Did you deliberately kind of use a flashcard system and practice this?
I kind of just did a lot. I kind of just did a lot of like slow solves where my goal was I had my memo, I blindfolded myself, and instead of timing, I just tried to come up with the setup move as fast as possible. And essentially, I would memorize the cube, put on a blindfold, time my execution with the blindfold on. That's how I would practice that, essentially.
So you weren't necessarily consciously trying to short circuit that path or go down a new path. You were just trying to do the damn thing as fast as possible.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good to try and throttle the backdoor. That's just going to hurt you if the image to alg direct association gets severed. You need the backup. That's absolutely necessary, and it's only going to hurt you to try and damage that.
So we're not talking about destroying the old route and making
right
and using the new route.
If you can do it fast enough for a certain letter pair, then absolutely go ahead. But especially with your new PAO letter pairs, which there are a lot of, making that direct association in a lot of cases will not only be faster, but just easier than linking it back to the letter pair. Because if you can get good enough at it, it overcomes the issue of reverse recall amnesia, and you can immediately know
Oh my goodness.
well, you don't even need to know what letter pair you're talking about if you just know what comm you're doing immediately.
Yeah. Dude, that is actually really interesting. Because I've known that I've needed to practice reverse recog. Like, I've known that I need to just take my list of actions and go, okay, well, what letter pair is this? It just hasn't felt like priority, but I think that I like this a lot because I can see this improving execution speed a lot. Because it is essentially, in we spoke about its recall, its comm recognition, and then its execution. This is taking out that comm recognition step, which exactly as you say, especially with PAO, that's actually quite significant. Or at least with my implementation of it, because reverse recognition is like a more significant step. Master Ice in my chat is asking, can you ask Stanley if in 3Blind he thinks of the word for the letter pair and then the image, or can he just go straight from the two letters, or can he just go from the two letters straight to the image?
I just use audio for 3Blind, so that doesn't really apply too much for me.
Okay, we're not going to tangent into that now, but I'm writing that down, dude. I think I actually, in one of the messages I sent you, I was like, I'm going to talk about this. To tangent slightly off Master Ice's question, Master Ice's question assumes that you're using images, or that you're actually visualizing for your longer term memo. Sig is somebody I know of who's spoken a lot about how he doesn't actually visualize. I'm curious if you visualize in any of your longer events. Do you?
I do visualize. Even for my shorter events, it costs me 0 time. I think that's just something that I'm naturally extremely good at. I'm able to completely visualize everything. Even when I did it for 3Blind, even when I did images in 3Blind, I could visualize and it would cost me no time.
Interesting.
And I just let it work.
So is that the kind of thing that, because I'm sure that this is a discussion among high-level blinders, do you feel like relative to other blinders, it's something that you're quite kind of naturally strong at? It's
and I'm pretty safely in the minority, I think, by visualizing this. Well, in 3Blind, I'm definitely in the minority for having visualized when I did when I did images.
Do you have a sense of, sorry, just to cut in, when did you switch from images to full audio? Just like what were you averaging?
Pretty much at the start of quarantine. I was averaging 18 when I did it.
Okay. So you were visualizing to quite a high level.
Yeah.
If I were to take something out of that, it's that visualization is not necessarily kind of an off limits technique. It's a figure out for yourself what works most effectively.
I think it is correct to say that most people will be hurt by visualizing at such a high level. I think I am just like very lucky to have a predisposition to where I can just do it.
Are there any other places in life you find yourself particularly easily able to visualize stuff? Or is it something you only notice in the context of memorization?
Well, I notice it no matter what I'm memorizing, it's something that I'm able to do. And in general, I'm able to just keep track of things. I have just a very strong working memory in day-to-day life as a result. It kind of falls down. I have a lot of trouble visualizing kind of real life situations with a bunch of real life people. I have trouble visualizing how like multiple people just like interact with one another. And I think it's kind of dependent on me knowing the space that I'm visualizing in, because like I'm not able to visualize very well when people are talking about a space that I've never been to. That's a super important part of it. First of all, that's probably kind of obvious, but also just real world people are boring, man. Like
Chat, don't take that personally. No. Yeah, I'm fully with you. I like that's part of why we use Pokemon for people, right? Because they're a little more memorable often.
Yeah.
Or I find that if a person works well for a letter pair or something, I'll often need to deliberately visualize them and figure out what is memorable and specific about this human being in contrast to others. Okay, Gregor agrees. Dude, I'm sure I had something profound and insightful to say or ask you. I've just completely lost it. I love it. Oh, here it is. So I'm curious. One of the things I get roasted for is that I basically learned freestyle mostly algorithmically. I still don't have a strong understanding of how comms work. We can talk about that, some other time. But one of the things that I think I struggle with is visualizing how pieces move around on the cube, particularly if I'm performing a commutator. So I'm curious, when you were learning comms, was it quite easy for you to visualize how pieces were moving around?
Yes, very much so. I had no trouble at all, like thinking about just a group of 3 pieces just moving around the cube.
Damn.
Like the way I learned freestyle at first, which by the way, this is not actually a good idea. This is not what you're getting from this. Don't do this. Do not do this.
Whatever you were about to say, I'm gonna clip it, excluding that disclaimer. we're gonna ship that to the world. Yeah.
So the way I learned freestyle was I watched the tutorial, did a couple of comms to make sure I could come up with them, memo to scramble and put the blindfold on, and did comms.
Gripped it and ripped it. I love it. Yeah.
Do not do that. That's a terrible idea. But what it did help with was, well, I don't know if it actually helped my visualization, but even with freestyle, I can kind of just idly like know where all the pieces are going. And I think it's helped me a lot with just being able to improvise algs, especially with floating in bigBLD. That's something I do a lot. Is there's a lot of improvisation that has to go on especially when you're changing algs and revising things a lot.
4-blind and 5-blind comms, because I know you've done a lot of comm development there.
Yeah. I've pretty much rewritten part of the. I've rewritten a lot of the meta, and I'm my sheet's done, by the way. It's ready to release, but I need.
Are you gonna release it publicly?
When people behave, yes.
All right. So maybe 2050.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. What I was looking for is how can I find an analog for figuring out, do I or would one have similar visualization capacity to you? You say that visualizing works for you at a high level. How do I know if it's the kind of thing I stick with or not? And I feel like potentially this comms thing is a helpful analog for that, because like it sounds like you can track the pieces moving around the cube, not because you're intimately familiar with comms and have practiced it a lot. It sounds like it came quite naturally to you, especially that first 3-star solve you're talking about. Whereas for me, like I
think being that good at visualization actually hurt me a little bit.
Interesting.
Because I came up with some horrific double rotation comms, because I was just like, I can track these pieces. I can track these pieces through 2 rotations. I'm just gonna do 2 rotations. So I came up with some absolutely horrific shit. And it hurt me in the long run, but I mean,
the comm police are coming for you, dude. We're gonna report you to the we're gonna report you to the board, dude. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I am conscious of time. There's probably one more question I'd like to throw at you, and then I'd be happy to wrap up. And it's a pretty self-interested one based on what I've said about my practice so far. And we've spoken a lot about the how and the what we're doing. It sounds like your recommendation in terms of the what is basically it's try and don't spend time on first pass and coding. Just grip it and rip it, and then encode more on the second pass.
I think that's also a personalized thing, and try some smaller attempts with that, and then come to a conclusion for yourself. Is encoding necessary on the first pass for me? And I think for me it's not, and that's a reason why I'm able to do 11-second first pass. And
per cube, you mean?
Yeah.
I looked at a few of Sig's attempts, and he seems to average around 10 as well. So that seems to be the that seems to be in the range for first pass speed, at least at quite a high level.
Yeah, I think his extra second is a combination of doing weak swap and just having done more multi-blind attempts in general. But yeah.
Being Graham Siggins kind of thing. Well, having worked very, very hard at it.
He has done as much multi-blind grinding as I've done 4-blind, 5-blind grinding. And you don't know how much I've ground at 4-blind, 5-blind.
I'm just imagining a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like often when people are like, Stanley, Graham, how do I get good at big blind or multi-blind? It's like, well, like step one, like do half the amount of practice I have. Like, and maybe this is a good note to end on. Is there anything, so I think I have a good sense of what to practice. Is there anything you'd say in terms of how to practice? Like how to efficiently structure practice? Or is it just like, is it kind of just practice forehead?
I think if it were any other event, it would be just practice forehead. But multi-blind has this inherent issue where there's such a high ratio of effort to time practicing that you get out of the event. No matter who you are, it takes so much effort to do 1 hour of practice, aka one attempt, compared to doing an hour of 3x3 solve.
Right. And when you say effort, you just mean kind of attention, mental energy, like it takes more out of you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you will die if you do 12 multi-blind attempts in a day. You'll probably just have pretty sore hands if you do 12 hours of 3x3. You will actually pass out if you do 12 multi-blind attempts. It was bad enough doing 3 in one day in a comp. That's an experience that I never want to do again.
I would probably agree. Just anecdotally speaking, I feel like the biggest thing I've been fighting last 30 days and this one is mental fatigue.
I think the biggest thing I'd say on that is that, like, unless you're like actually superhuman, I would not recommend doing more than 7 attempts a week. If that means putting 2 on one day, if that means putting like 2 on one day and skipping one day, sure. But like doing 3 attempts in one day is a huge red flag. And doing attempts every day and like doing 2 on some days is also a huge red flag to me.
Interesting. And define attempt here. Like, so because I'm doing 8 and 16 cubers. Are you talking about a big boy attempt?
I'm talking about a big attempt.
Right. Okay.
And I would say anything that's like above like 50% of your max in an hour is a big attempt. Okay. Or maybe that's a little bit kind of that's a little bit of a low bar. Like if you're able to do 25 cubes in an hour, if you're like I would say you could probably get away with doing like more 16 cube attempts or whatnot. But if you're trying like 20 cubes or something, that's like a full attempt. Right. That's a full attempt to me.
So we could probably translate this into like minutes of practice, because I would probably imagine that like your fatigue over time is exponential relative to how long you've been focusing.
Correct.
Like you are significantly more tired when you've been focusing for 40 minutes than if you just focus for 30 minutes.
Yeah. Off topic, but I've theorized that it's actually like just a very high order polynomial rather than exponential.
No, exponential did sound wrong, but
yeah, that's just a theory though. I like this is just straight up like conspiracy theory level, just out of the blue. But I think the mental effort to do bigger multi-blind attempts or more minutes of practice scales cubically. That's what I think.
Interesting. So for a friend who doesn't know what scales cubically mean, you want to define that?
In very basic terms, twice as much time practicing will take 2 cubed or 8 times as much effort, mental fatigue.
Interesting.
It's not exact, and I think there's nuance to it. Overall, if you graph this, I think it would be approximately a cubic polynomial.
I have a question though. I wonder, does that not top out? Because I'm thinking about somebody like Sig doing his, 200 cube attempt. My gut. Look, obviously they're just sitting down for 6 hours, constantly focusing. You're going to have physical fatigue at a point as well. But I would almost ask him, is doing 5 hours significantly harder than doing 3 hours? Like,
I would argue very much so, as someone who's never done it.
Well,
but the thing with 5 hours is at that point, like just being a human starts to catch up with you, and things like bodily functions, hunger, and just generally like boredom will catch
General
up with
boredom.
you
Yeah.
really, really quickly. And I think between 3 hours and 5 hours, it's a there comes a very big threshold with that, and especially after 6 hours, the hunger factor gets
Mm.
incredibly limiting.
Mm.
At least that's my thought. Again, these are just like theories. I do think that at a certain point, I don't think it really tops out in a sense as much as we don't register it as taking more effort just because like we're kind of numbed by
Right.
the
Right.
the like physical stakes of taking 5 hours to do it.
So it may become more demanding, but we're already so friggin' wrecked that like
Right.
we don't experience the marginal increase as much as we do when we
Right.
still have a
Yeah.
soul.
And there's a reason nobody has done a 24-hour multi-blind attempt ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure people have noticed that around these big attempts that people do, they really do not do a lot of multi-blind surrounding it. And that is, very, very deliberate.
Kind of like carbo loading, building up capacity, or
Yeah,
making sure that you're not depleting yourself
like they
beforehand.
might, warm up for like doing it beforehand, like Graham did for the 200 cube attempt.
Sure.
But afterwards,
Oh, you mean particularly after the
yeah,
attempt?
yeah. At least I have not seen people. You can correct me if I'm wrong and get actual data on this, but I do not recall him just sending 65 cubes again
Yeah.
right after doing
Yeah.
200.
That's actually an interesting way of measuring it. Is less what is my perceived exertion during the attempt, more what is my recovery time after the attempt. That's the kind of thing that gives you a good sense of the
Right.
relative effort expended.
Yeah. But the big takeaway from all of this is that you can't spend all of your time in the practice room. Like, you have to practice remotely. And that comes in the form of drilling your PAO shit and just getting really good at your direct image to alg association. That's something you can practice for hours and hours and not get as mentally fatigued. It'll catch up to you after a while, but that has a slower growth rate. That's something where you can put in a lot more time, and you can kind of use attempts more as a check-in of how is that going
Interesting.
in a way.
Interesting.
And doing small attempts as well is another way to do it, because it is much easier to do. This is kind of a really, really absurd example, but it's much easier to do 210 2-cube attempts than it is to do 760 cube attempts.
Yeah.
So
Right.
doing smaller attempts is also a way to cushion the mental fatigue.
Interesting.
It's just very metered, but in a much more forgiving way.
So currently what I've been doing is an 8 cube, an 8 cube, and a 16 cube attempt. And 8 cubes takes me about 20 to 25 minutes at the moment. But I'm almost 8 cubes down into 4 cube attempts, and then have one larger attempt kind of each day. Would you recommend a path that's less mental fatigue, or would you say, to the degree like find whatever my limit is in terms of like, would you say that 8 cubes is better than 4 cubes and I should prefer that if I can?
I would say that your minimum attempt that you're really doing as serious practice should be whatever your first review passes. So in this case, 4. I think that's a good,
Interesting. That's
very, very low level baseline.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think doing 8, 8, 16 is a good way to approach it. And yeah, as you build up, it's good to always have at least, one day where you're just doing, an actual, maxed out attempt within the hour. Even going over is like another thing that is, it's something people don't practice a lot, but it's like actually really, really valuable, is to do attempts that are like 70 to 75 minutes.
Bringing yourself over that hour threshold.
Right. It gets you used to doing more memorization, first of all, but also builds up your mental endurance so that 60 minutes is just a walk in the park next time. And that's really, really useful. For when you're in execution in a multi-blind attempt, you aren't just dropped in there. You had to do 40 minutes of work to get to that point.
Yeah.
You need to be ready to associate everything instantly after 40 minutes of basically just cramming for a test.
Yeah. You're about to pull a phenomenal amount of information out of your head very quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's especially jarring the higher you go. It is absolutely insane how much harder that gets from 30 to 40 and then from 40 to 50 cubes. And I am not looking forward to being a 60 plus multiblinder.
Interesting.
It already feels like I'm executing at 3 blind speed, but then I go back to the VODs and it's like, oh, that cube had 17-second execution. That's not 3 blind speed. And it's like, yeah, the recall is just not quite there. You know, it is. I say instant and I mean instant. And the other thing is that there are 2 things that are scaling each time: the amount of information that you're compressing, first of all, and also the speed at which you have to compress it. It creates such huge constraints the further in you go, and it's something you have to adapt to really, really quickly.
Multiblind is in fact a hard event.
Yeah.
Shocked.
That's
I know.
True.
Yeah. Damn. How are you time-wise? I'm feeling like this might be a good place to call it. Where do things sit with you?
I think so as well. Yeah. It's been. I think we kind of hit a good place to end it off here. And in the future, you know, I could. Yeah, we could pick this up. We could pick this up next time if you want, or we could choose a different topic. Either way, I think talked about a lot of really really cool topics, and I think there's still so much more down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, there really is. It's been fascinating, dude. Thank you so much for making the time and being willing to share your thoughts.
Definitely.
I've really enjoyed it.
Well, it's been great. I really enjoyed this talk as well. It was really nice to just be able to kind of just dump information and just get people thinking for a while. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Okay.